Hey Musties! Today we're checking out Godzilla's 10 most memorable movie adversaries, a list from MovieWeb. I will have in the description box the link to the actual article so you can read the full piece. These are the most iconic foes Godzilla has ever taken on since his 1954 debut. Now remember, we're going with memorable according to the article. So number 10 on the list right away is Biollante. My first thought is, okay, maybe Biollante might deserve to be on this list. It's extremely different from most of the other monsters. What actually makes this a little less memorable is the fact that Biollante's really only ever appeared in one live-action movie. You can argue that Biollante appeared in the animated, I think 2017 Godzilla Planet of the Monsters, where Godzilla Earth had similarities to Biollante, like the fact that the plant life had adapted and evolved to conform to Godzilla and thrive off of Godzilla. But for the general audience, unless you've seen all the movies, Biollante is not that memorable. Now you could argue, is popularity a part of what is memorable? Yes, in my opinion. The more popular a character is, the more it sinks into your brain and becomes memorable. So for the general public, they have no idea who Biollante is. But let's see what some of they argued here is. The fact that the script for Godzilla vs. Biollante originated from a writing contest is truly flabbergasting. That is true, yes. The script for Godzilla vs. Biollante was created by a fan, and that is unique and memorable as a fun fact. There are a number of other factors that determine what makes something memorable, and we'll discuss some more of those factors as this video continues. The combination of G cells and the DNA of a bereaved father's late daughter. Yes, very true, very dark script compared to most Godzilla films. We could use more stuff like that. Number 9. Destroya. Yes, Destroya is definitely, in my opinion, more memorable than Biollante. I would agree with that. Once again, Destroya has only ever really appeared one Godzilla movie, and so that kind of makes it more obscure of a monster. Just the very beginning of the movie, when Godzilla first appears in the opening scene, Godzilla is already a train wreck, is making this movie so memorable, it draws more attention to Destroya. Destroya being a powerhouse and a fan favorite compared to even Biollante, but it is hard to argue that the character is more memorable than most of Godzilla's other characters, especially when you consider the fact that a lot of the Showa series was aired on TV before I was even born, just like Saturday morning specials. And so these iconic characters, like for example, like Megalon, even though Megalon may not be a fan favorite like Destroya is, it's definitely memorable because it's one of the most played films in Godzilla history. Maybe the rights for it were just much cheaper, and so they were able to afford to run it on Saturday morning so often. Point is though, Destroya is definitely less popular than Megalon, just by terms of exposure. Godzilla vs. Destroya is a gut punch for fans of the franchise. Why? Because it's the final version of the Oxygen Destroyer created crustacean kills Godzilla, and it's not pretty. People forget that technically it is the meltdown that killed Godzilla instead of Destroya, but Godzilla was also overpowered in that movie. His atomic breath was amplified, and even that wasn't enough to actually fully kill Destroya without the help of the military and the freezer weapons combining. To say that Godzilla would maybe have a better chance if he wasn't melting down, sure, he might be able to recover better with his body, but power-wise, I imagine he would just eventually drain his own energy, shooting a weaker atomic breath when it was blue at Destroya rather than the full red spiral fire. Abra. No, this is why I'm making this video. You could say he's memorable in the terms of the fact that, like I said before, the Showa era series was aired on TV very often. But to say Abra is memorable, it's just a giant lobster that has one small claw and one big claw. It's nothing like Mothra, on the other hand, where, sure, Mothra is just a moth, but its colorful patterns at least make it unique. I can't remember how many old-timers I've spoken to who've told me, oh yeah, remember Godzilla used to fight that moth. Nobody ever says, oh yeah, Godzilla used to fight that lobster or that crab. People don't even mislabel it as a crab. Nobody genuinely remembers this character. Abra was barely even in that movie. Technically, wasn't it his movie? Like this, one of the titles was Abra Horror of the Deep. They even just kept it as a subplot in its own movie. Abra even had a co-star in a movie with Godzilla, Mothra, and what's that giant flying turkey vulture? I bet that's next on the list. But a modern adaptation of Abra is very doable, since the concept of it's what we don't see that scary. Isn't that what Gareth Edwards tried doing in the 2014, where you hid Godzilla too much, like Jaws? It just left fans frustrated. It would probably just be for the best that the filmmakers leave out the boulder tennis match. I mean, we've already gone crazy enough with the Monsterverse. I don't think a boulder match would be too far over the top at this point. Number 7, Gigan. Yes, yes, yes. This is a nice recovery here For some reason, Gigan looks like an Ultraman monster, but somehow something about Gigan turns out so right. Surprising, considering Gigan is basically a walking, squawking death machine with a beak and one eye. With a chainsaw for a belly and hooks for hands, it is almost just a concoction, just like a pure mess thrown together of like scrap parts from other kaiju. And yet, for some reason, it looks right. Number 6, ooh, Hedora. Where does it rank compared to Gigan? I would actually say Hedora is a little bit less memorable. Once again, having very few appearances compared to Gigan. I mean, Gigan hasn't had that many appearances either. I believe a total of 3. Hedora's only really had one brief cameo in Final Wars. Hedora's cameo was only 5 or so seconds long. In the indictment of society's waste disposal methods, Hedora exists to dissuade humanity from littering. Once again, maybe not necessarily the most popular, but definitely unforgettable. This almost makes Hedora more similar to Godzilla than any of other adversaries. I never really thought about that like that. Yeah, Hedora is one of those few kaiju who's only ever had one appearance, but is so unique and so strange that it kind of leaves a toxic spill on your brain. Number 5. Number 5 is King Ghidorah? I would argue this is tied for top 2 right here. From the overwhelming size to the lightning for breath, there's something about Ghidorah's design that complements Godzilla's design. It's maybe the gold colors, it's the scaly dragon-like look that Godzilla also almost has a dragon-like look. Ghidorah is definitely memorable because not only does he have 3 heads, he's bigger than Godzilla, much bigger. In this very debut movie, it required Godzilla to team up with 2 other monsters to take him down. It's not too often that Godzilla actually has to team up with other monsters. In fact, save for the 1990s Heisei era, Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah, the Big G has never been able to take on the Big Dragon solo. In Godzilla, Mothra, King Ghidorah and Mothra literally teamed up and Godzilla still beat them. Number 4, King Kong. This is getting a little bit crazy. Okay, imagine if Marvel and DC Comics did a crossover, and then somebody did an article after Spider-Man fought Superman, and they said, Spider-Man's most notable foes of all time, and they listed on that list Superman. Sure, they fought, but that is not Spider-Man's foe. That's called a crossover. Sure, right now King Kong is heavily in the Godzilla lore. Once this MonsterVerse is done, it's going to go back to as if Godzilla was never part of King Kong's universe. At the same time, does the general public understand that? Does the general public care? People are going to look back and remember, hey, Godzilla fought King Kong multiple times. So yeah, this article may be correct in listing King Kong, although some people could even argue that King Kong is more memorable than Godzilla himself. So then, shouldn't he be number 1 on the list? Number 3, Mechagodzilla. Easily one of the most essential Toho Godzilla movies. Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla is an all-timer. It was always one of my favorite too as a kid. I mean, I got into Godzilla before the Heisei films came to America, so I only knew the Showa era growing up. I think what made Mechagodzilla so memorable is that it was an indirect return to form for Godzilla. In the 60s, Godzilla had transitioned from a villain to an anti-hero to a flat-out hero approaching the 70s. Mechagodzilla first appears as Godzilla in disguise, and he gets to live out those dark fantasies for us that we've been wanting to see Godzilla wreck the city again. And here he is, doing what Godzilla no longer does. He's a more Godzilla than Godzilla. Plus, this is around the time of the UFO craze across the world. And I know it's not Mechagodzilla himself, but his creators are these reptilian apes in disguise as humans. Wild stuff. And to this day, Mechagodzilla is still seen as a wild card. And you just never know when he's going to go berserk and he'll just let loose on this city. For its fans, there's also the immediate sequel, Terror of Mechagodzilla, which is arguably just as solid. From an entertainment perspective, yes. Just as solid, no, it doesn't hold up nearly as well as the original, but it is just as fun, perhaps. Okay, so we are now including King Kong in the list of Godzilla foes. So would that not make King Kong more memorable than Mechagodzilla? See, this is where the conflict grows in, because now if you're including King Kong, he's got more popularity and he's more recognizable and memorable. I mean, like, how many bootlegs, just knockoff giant ape movies are there? Now, how many knockoff giant robot dinosaur movies are there? Not nearly as many as there are bootleg King Kong movies. So by default, King Kong should probably be number 1 on this list. Number 2, Mothra. Like, as I said many times before already, Mothra is extremely memorable. Many people remember that there's a giant bug that Godzilla fights. This is the point that I was making with the Abra entry at number 8. But now, once again, to say Mothra is somehow more recognizable than King Kong or more memorable than King Kong, no, you can't do that. King Kong aside, yes, Mothra probably should be like number 2. And yes, Mothra being the first kaiju in the Godzilla universe to have multiple forms and evolution process or metamorphosis definitely helps make Mothra more unique and more memorable. I believe it wasn't until Hedora the Smog Monster that the next Godzilla monster came along that had multiple forms or stages, excluding Godzilla's son, who was born in an infant stage early in the movie and then grew to like a toddler phase by the end of Son of Godzilla. Now, number 1 should not, in no case, be Godzilla, because that would be a cop-out. Rodan? wait a minute. Okay, if you want to put Rodan in like spot number 8 where Abra was, because at the end of the day, Rodan is just a giant pterodactyl. Abra is just a giant lobster, except Rodan's appeared many times, so he can easily take the spot number 8. I love Rodan. I love all the monsters on this list. To say Rodan is more memorable than at least, let me see here. To say Rodan is more memorable than Mothra, Mechagodzilla, King Kong, King Ghidorah is laughable. As I was saying earlier, popularity is a huge factor in something being memorable. The more popular something is, the more likely you are to remember it. Also, the more unique something is, or how similar something is to something else. Rodan is very similar to Godzilla in the fact that they're both very dinosaur-like. On the other hand, Biollante and Destroya are very unique compared to Godzilla. But Ghidorah, Mothra are very popular like Rodan. But what actually makes it memorable is a balance between the 3 of these issues. Because of this balance between popularity, a lack of uniqueness, and being similar to Godzilla, perhaps you should actually argue that Rodan is the definitive number 5 choice on this list, like perfectly right in the middle, that all the other characters should be worked around, but definitely not number 1. Not in popularity, not in uniqueness, and not just in a memorable trait. Rodan's trademark is his supersonic speed. And save for one-time appearance as Fire Rodan in Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2, that's mostly what he's been relegated to. And that's Rodan's charm, like Anguirus. If he's charmful like Anguirus, then why didn't Anguirus make this list? Rodan's main job is just to be one of the first contacts on Godzilla's list once things hit the fan. I mean, Mothra's still the first contact on Godzilla's list, usually. So even by your own logic here, that does not make sense. He's just a backup ally for Godzilla, not even a main enemy anymore. He is memorable, but compare him to the other list characters here, it seems like they just threw a whole bunch of names in a hat and pulled them out for this list here. I'm very disappointed. Come on, MovieWeb, get your people in line here. All right, Musties, what did you think of this list? What did you think of my thoughts on the list? What is your list of the top 10 most memorable kaiju in the Godzilla series? I'll do my own video in the future, and you guys can pick me apart for getting the list wrong.